Hi, this is Ryan Regan from HK Excel. A while ago, I posted a few IA videos on YouTube, including for microeconomics, for international economics. The IA videos actually became extremely popular on YouTube and received over 10,000 views, all by IB students. So in those videos, I gave a very direct approach on how to write a level 7 IA, like very direct outline, step-by-step outline, how to write a level 7 IA. And actually, a lot of students began to email us about making an EE video because it's very popular for people to write extended essays on economics, right? And extended essays is very hard because generally IB students waste a lot of time doing an extended essay, lacking any sort of direction. Well, this video here is designed to help you to give you a concrete strategy to write a level A extended essay using a very minimal time. I can guarantee you in about 10 to 15 hours you can produce a level A extended essay using the strategy I'm about to teach you. Well, before actually I refrained from making this extended essay video, and the reason was because extended essays, like I thought that everyone has a different extended essay. It's like everyone has a different question. How can I possibly make a video that can help everyone? Well, after helping 20 to 30 students for the extended essay, now I've developed a concrete strategy to really help you with the extended essay. I'll give you a very exact outline about what to put in your extended essay. I guarantee you, just 10 hours, you can write a grade A extended essay. So what are the most popular topics for the economics extended essay? Read something like this. Most common topic. Okay? What market structure best characterizes XXX, okay? So XXX can be any market structure. So for example, what market structure best characterizes the smartphone industry? What market structure best characterizes the supermarket industry? Anything like that, right? So if you want to follow along with this video, you want me to help you with my outline, I would suggest you to pick this type of a topic, okay? So just think of a market structure you're interested in and then use this topic. So after your title page, the first thing that should appear in your extended essay is something called the abstract. Okay? Abstract. Well, what is an abstract? The abstract is a summary, about 200 or 300 word summary of your whole extended essay, right? So although the abstract is in the beginning of your extended essay, you should write the abstract at the end, after you have finished the entire extended essay. Then you write the abstract, right? Because I know some students actually, they came with only an abstract and nothing in the end, and that can't be right because the abstract is a summary, so you write the summary at the end. Okay, it's a summary of your extended essay, 200 to 300 words. But after your abstract in your extended essay, the next thing that should show up is the introduction. Introduction. So the introduction should answer two key questions. These two key questions would help you get high marks for the introduction criteria. Okay. So what are the two criteria? What are the two things you need to aim for in your introduction? So the first thing you should talk about is why significant. Okay. So why is this topic significant? So the way you should think about it is, why is this market going to have an impact on society? So why does it matter to everyone? Why does it matter? Like for example, let's say I'm doing the smartphone industry, for example, right? So why is it significant? Well, if I were doing it, I would say something like smartphones are used by almost everyone in the entire planet across different countries. So the smartphone, the functionalities in the smartphone affects how people live their lives every single day, right? So the behavior of firms in the smartphone market is going to deeply affect everybody's daily lives. Hence, it's important to know what market structure is the smartphone industry, so that we can predict the firm's behavior. Okay, so that was one example. Another example, for example, let's say you're investigating the bus industry in Hong Kong. Okay, so we want to know what industry is the bus industry in Hong Kong. So I can say something like, bus is the primary mode of transport for most Hong Kong people. So a lot of Hong Kong people travel to work every day using the bus. So therefore, it is how the firms behave in the bus market, and the development of the bus market is going to have a profound impact on all citizens of Hong Kong. So that is what is meant by significant. It has to have an impact on society. All right. So the second one, besides why significant, is why interesting. So this is more personal. Why is it interesting? So going back to the smartphone example. So why would the smartphone market be interesting to me as research? So if I were doing it, I would say the smartphone industry is relatively new. So it is a new market that has only came about 4 to 5 years ago, right, when Apple launched the iPhone. So it is a relatively new market with a lot of new players. So the market is still developing at a rapid rate, and as a result, I'm very interested to know about what kind of market structure is the smartphone market. So if I use the bus example, I would say something like, personally, I ride the bus every single day, and it deeply affects my life and my family's life. So I want to know how firms are likely to behave and how prices are going to change in the future, things like that, like personal engagement. Okay, so your introduction, if it answers these two questions well, you'll be good, right? So why significant? Again, society impact. Why interesting? So why do you feel intrigued to do it? Okay. Okay. So after having your introduction, the next thing is what we call the hypothesis. Right? You need a hypothesis. So what is being meant by hypothesis? So hypothesis is what you think the final result is going to be, and hypothesis is generally based on personal observation, right? It has to be based on personal observation, okay? Because it's before you do any research. So for example, going back to the smartphone market, I would basically say, so I would think that the smartphone market is an oligopoly. So the reason why I would think it is an oligopoly was because I see people every day mostly using iPhones or Samsung, right? So it appears to be a duopoly, very clear duopoly. And there's very high barriers of entry, right? Because there's high startup costs. Distribution costs is very, very high, right? And the cost for research and development is very high. And also we see that Samsung and Apple are making billions of dollars a year. So there's very high profits, which may be classified as abnormal profits. So this is, again, a feature of oligopoly. So for any single market, you could basically use your personal observations to make a hypothesis. So after reading the hypothesis, you can go to the next part, which is what I call, you can title it something like basic economic theories. Okay? So this part will be one of the easiest parts in your IA, because what you do in this part actually is you give a brief summary about what are the different market structures, okay? And you can basically refer to your textbooks, okay? So basically you define each market structure, okay? So including perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly, okay? So just write in point form, what are these market structures mean? Just talk about what they mean. And then, so this part is very easy, okay? Okay, so now things start to get a bit interesting. Now we're going to go to your body paragraphs in your extended essay. So how do we investigate whether, what kind of market structure is a certain market, right? So basically the approach I would recommend is you look at, for a market there are different aspects, right? Different aspects. So here are some aspects. Okay, so the number one aspect is the size and number of firms, right? So for example, perfect competition, very small firms and an infinite number of firms. Oligopoly, large firms and small number of firms. So this first criteria you can talk about. Second criteria is the way of competition. So for example, perfect competition, there is very little non-price competition, right? For monopolistic competition, mainly non-price competition, just a small degree, and some price competition. Oligopoly, mainly non-price competition, right? So the way of competition. The third one is basically the barriers of entry, very, very important. So for monopolistic competition and perfect competition, low barriers of entry. For monopolies and oligopolies, very high barriers of entry, right? So now you basically have three aspects, right? These are the three main aspects about a market structure, okay? So, and then under each aspect, you can do research using two approaches. The first approach is what we call primary research, okay? Primary research means that the data is found by you yourself, not found by third parties, right? So let's say you're doing surveys or you are doing some sort of experiment on your own. So this is primary research. The second one is secondary research. Okay. Secondary research means you rely on third parties' data and you use it to back up your findings, right? So for each criteria, you have both primary research, PR, and secondary research. Okay? So as you can see, a very effective yet simple outline for your extended essay. So you have 3 criteria, and under each criteria, you have 2 modes of research, right? So it's very easy for the examiner to give you marks. Okay, so first let's look at the first aspect. The first aspect, the number of firms and the size of firms. So you notice there are two things here, the number and the size. Okay, so 2 things you want to investigate. Let's first talk about the number. So how many firms are in the market? Well, it really depends on what type of market structure you're looking at. You need to get creative about how to find the number of firms in a certain market, right? But I'll give you some examples to sort of open your eyes a little, get your brain thinking. Let's say I'm trying to look for, as I'm saying, what is the market structure for schools in Hong Kong? Schools in Hong Kong. Okay, so what you understand, so it's very easy to find how many schools are in Hong Kong. Just go to the Education Bureau, right? So because in Hong Kong, in order to become a school, you need to register under the Education Bureau, right? And in the Education Bureau's website, there's a list of all schools, and you can immediately find the number of schools, and that would be, basically, this would be classified as secondary research, right? Because it is the Education Bureau who did the counting, okay? So for example, schools. So another example would be like, let's say, tourist attractions. For example, what is the market structure for shopping malls in Hong Kong? Okay, so you don't know how many shopping malls there are, but if you go, like for example, malls, right? So you go to tourism website. Like in Hong Kong, there's a bureau for tourism. You go to that bureau's website and you can find how many shopping malls are classified as tourist attractions, right? Or even if you do theme parks, you can use tourism websites as well. Let's say if you do the smartphone industry, right? The smartphone industry, I'm sure there are some professional reports that study the smartphone industry, right? So you just need to find a professional report. Like for example, big accounting firms or big consulting firms, they like to make reports about different markets every year. You can try to look for those reports, and you can basically include it. And again, this is secondary research. All of these are secondary research. If you're doing a very small market, let's say, what is the market structure for restaurants in Leighton Road? This type of thing, you can do counting. You can just go there and count. And if you actually count the number of firms, this would be primary research. Put it under the primary research category. Reason being, you did the research, right? Okay. Okay. So the size of firms. The size of firm, there are 2 things you can do here that can make your life very easy. Number 1 is finding the market share. Number 2 is you want to find the concentration ratio. Now, let me talk about each of these independently. So the market share basically means it's normally by revenue, okay? So let's say you have let's say this market had $100 of revenue, okay, total revenue. And company A makes $20 of revenue. So company A is going to have 20% of the market share, okay? So it's by revenue. So basically, how can you find this type of data? Well, for large markets such as smartphones, you can look at the company's website, different companies' website, and you can basically find their revenue, right? So you find all the company's revenue, add them together, right? So you have the total revenue, and then you find each firm's revenue, and you divide by the total revenue, and you would get the market share, right? So this type of thing would work for large markets. Okay, but how about smaller markets, let's say restaurant markets? So for these markets, you can basically, I would suggest you to do primary research. So what you do is you count the number of customers going to each restaurant, maybe at a certain time of day, right? At a certain time of the day, and then for different restaurants, and then you basically estimate their revenues and then calculate a market share, right? So, and then at the end, after you have the market share calculation, you should present your data using a pie chart, right? A pie chart. So a pie chart shows company A, company B, company C, company D. Each firm, how much market share does it have, right? The next thing is the concentration ratio. We can talk about it in terms of concentration ratio. So this concentration ratio determines what type of market structure it is as well, because oligopolies have very high concentration ratios. That's one of the largest characteristics of oligopolies. Very few firms each having high share of the market, right? Perfect competition or monopolistic competition, low share of the market, so very low concentration ratios, okay? So concentration ratio, if you don't know, what does it mean? So concentration ratio you can find for CR1, CR2, CR3, and CR4. So what is meant by CR1? CR1 is talking about how much of the market does the largest firm own. So for example, if the largest firm in the market has 30% of market share, and CR1 is 30%. CR2 is the two largest firms combined, how much market share they have. So for example, the two largest markets maybe have 80% of the market, so that's 80. CR3 is the top 3 firms, how much market share? CR4 is the top 4 firms, okay? So this will give you insights about what market structure you're studying. Okay, so the third thing you can look at is basically what we call the method of competition. How do firms normally compete in the market? Okay. So there's price and non-price. So in every single market, both competitions are existent. Any single market, there's both price competition and non-price competition. The question here is price competition heavier or non-price competition heavier? So how can you, basically first you say, you want to figure out if there's price competition, right? So what is the best way to figure out if there's price competition? In my opinion, you look at the profit margins, okay? So how much percent does the firm make out of a certain, like for example, out of revenue, how much is converted into profits, right? So the higher the profit margin, high profit margin would suggest there to be more non-price competition, right? So because if the profit margin is very low, that suggests that there is very high price competition. So the firms keep competing to lower prices, which would squeeze the profit margin. So I'll give you an example. For example, in supermarkets, right? So all supermarkets sell basically the same type of good, right? So, and because of that, they rely very heavily on price competition. So for example, for Amazon, the profit margin, like they're kind of a retailer, it's down to like 5%, very, very low profit margins, even for supermarkets. So you can basically find profit margin. If you're doing a big market like supermarkets, well, you can look at their balance sheets and look for their profit margin, and you will see it's very low. So this suggests there is very heavy price competition. So you can find, this is basically secondary research, right? So finding the profit margin. Okay. The second one would be non-price competition. So non-price competition, what you want to do is look for, there are 2 things you can do, right? The first is you can basically do primary research, okay, to find out how do firms differentiate their products, right? So the best way is, for example, if you have 2 firms, you can make a table that looks something like this, okay? So firm A and firm B, and then here you have characteristics of products, okay? And then you have a chart to talk about the different characteristics. Then below this table, you say, okay, so these are the main points of differentiation, right? And then also you can do customer surveys. So if you do customer surveys, which is a type of primary research, and ask them what is the most important factor in your purchase, right? So you come up with an idea, okay, so price competition or non-price competition, very easy. The marking scheme of the extended essay, basically the conclusion. What you need to write a good conclusion is you have to first answer the question. So you have to tell specifically what kind of market structure is your market, and then you also have to draw back on what you find in your extended essays. You need to link it to how you did research. Okay, so this is my recommended structure for your conclusion. So in the first paragraph, you talk about how many firms are there in the market, what is the market share. For example, in this market, we have found that there's a very high market share by top few firms. And this is done through looking at the balance sheets of the different firms and then measuring the market share based on the revenue. And also a concentration ratio was calculated, and it was found that there's a very high concentration ratio. Okay? And in terms of barriers, then you can say, oh, this market has high barriers of entry. This is found out through, we've estimated very high setup costs for this market, and also there's a very tedious licensing process, for example, right? Ways of competition, so you say it is mainly, for example, non-price competition, because we found that the profit margin is very high, and there's a lot of differentiation between different products. And you conclude, so say, therefore, this appears to be an oligopoly. Okay, so now let's look at the final part, which is what we call the evaluation. So there's only one point for evaluation, which is to talk about the weaknesses in your extended essay. Okay, so I would suggest you to use this method. Just weakness 1, okay, so write down the weakness and then elaborate on it. Weakness number 2, elaborate on it, and then go on and on for the different weaknesses. I would suggest you to have 5 to 6. So obviously it really depends on your extended essay itself, what kind of weaknesses there are. I'll give you 2 weaknesses that basically, if you do this market structure topic, no matter what market you do, there will always be these 2 weaknesses. First is limited data, right? So for all the surveys that you did, you can always say it's limited data. Well, that's because you just did use a sampling approach. You had a sample. The sample is never going to be truly representative of the entire population. So that's number 1. Work for everything, okay? And you disregarded indirect competition. That's true for sure. For any market, there's indirect competition, right? Like, for example, the iPhones may be indirectly competing with other methods of communication, for example, Skype, right? So those, as technology change, it will indirectly affect the phone industry. Or for example, if we do theme parks in Hong Kong, right? So for theme parks, there's indirect competition from a lot of different places, from basically all tourism sites, or from other regions, right? So like Ocean Park in Hong Kong may be facing competition from Disneyland in Japan, right? There's indirect competition that our essay would not possibly investigate on, okay? So the other ones I would suggest you to think of it on your own, but these 2 works for sure.